May it please the court, counsel for Officer Sanchez, friends and family of Rajan Moonesinghe, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Rajan Moonesinghe was not in the imminent commission of murder or attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force when Daniel Sanchez shot him 5 times on November 15, 2022, nor did Daniel Sanchez have a reasonable belief that he was. All Daniel Sanchez had to do was give Rajan Moonesinghe a chance to comply with the right and proper instruction that was reasonable that Daniel Sanchez gave. Drop the gun. But you heard testimony and you can do basic math if you understand it. Before that command was even out of Daniel Sanchez's mouth, he had made the decision to shoot Rajan Moonesinghe. And he shot him 5 times. While Rajan Moonesinghe was standing with the rifle pointed at the ground in the center of his porch under floodlights. Daniel Sanchez did not have a reasonable belief that Rajan Moonesinghe was attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force on him, or was going to murder him or any of the other people in that street. Each shot is an independent instance for which Officer Sanchez can be found guilty. And you need not agree on which shot. If the 4 of you believe that shot number 1 constituted a criminal offense, he is guilty. The 4 of you believe that shot number 3 or 4 was a violation of the law, he is guilty. And if the 4 of you, and some of you are alternate, find that shot number 5 or number 1 was an offense, then he is guilty. You need not all agree on which one. He has to have a reasonable belief for each and every time that he used deadly force. We have seen and seen and seen the video and pictures of what happened out there that night, and they never change. And I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that in certain respects, it is not a complicated exercise when you see a shooting that is on film. You look at the person who was shot, and you say, where is the moment when he was attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force or in the imminent commission of murder? And it isn't here on any of these. And the time is on here because it takes 0.3 of a second to decide on an action and commit that action. At minus 0.4 seconds from when he fires the first shot, Daniel Sanchez has begun the command to drop the gun. That's what happened. So at about minus 0.3 seconds, before he's even finished that command, he has made the decision to fire the first time. And then, and Rajan Moonesinghe's firearm, as we've been over and over and over and over, was pointed at the ground at an angle to his body, with the butt against his chest. Weapon discharge 2, 0.3 of a second later. Discharge 3, 0.3 of a second later, and now he is dropping the weapon. And then there is a perceptible pause. You can see it every time you watch this video. You can see it. You can hear it. It's plain as day. And it's time. 1.2 seconds. From shot 3 to shot 4. Rajan has dropped the rifle. And that is between 3 and 4 times the amount of time that you need to perceive that he dropped the rifle and make a decision to stop firing. And instead, his decision is to continue firing. And that is shot 4. And then 0.6 of a second, which is twice the amount of time you need to make yet another decision, he fires shot 5. Now, it's a good point from the counsel that Daniel Sanchez is not seeing these in still photographs, he's seeing them in real time. This is to illustrate to you that it is clear as could possibly be that Rajan Moonesinghe was never attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force or in the commission of murder at each of these times. And you can watch this on film, you can look at it in still photographs, you can speed it up, you can slow it down, and it never changes. Rajan Moonesinghe walks out onto his porch with a rifle pointed at the ground. Kevin Hall was absolutely right to call the police that day. He was absolutely right. The police were absolutely right to respond in a way where their ability to locate Rajan Moonesinghe before he could locate them was the right tactical decision to make. Nobody quarrels with that. You still have to have a reasonable belief that what this person, when you encounter him, is doing is attempting to commit or committing unlawful deadly force or in the imminent commission. And imminent means about to happen next, not what happened even 10 seconds ago. And there was an ordinary prudent person there that day. And his name is Kevin Hall. And no matter how many times you watch this, it never changes. Rajan turns and walks out in the middle of the porch. He's backlit and with the rifle barrel down to the ground. Officer Sanchez runs up with a weapon on target. You were told that it's a problem that they have training officers, that they put their weapon on target too soon or they have their gun up too high before the decision to use deadly force is made. And he yells, "Drop the gun," shoots him 3 times. Rajan drops the gun, he shoots him again, and then he shoots him again. And we've heard some ridiculousness, frankly, about, well, you don't know if he saw him drop the gun. If he didn't see him drop the gun, he's not supposed to shoot him. You're not supposed to shoot what you can't see. He shot him 5 times. He yelled, "Drop the gun," and he hit his target 5 times. Officer Sanchez could see just fine what was going on. Just fine. And Rajan dropped the gun. When you have dropped a weapon, what are you using unlawful deadly force or in the imminent commission of murder with? If he'd been attempting to use deadly force or in the imminent commission of murder, you just go to the part of the tape that he was doing, and there it is, the case is over. Done. But no matter how many times you watch this material, you never see that. And because of that, because of this tape, close the door! Where is he? Because of that, they can't tell you that he was attempting to committing murder or unlawful deadly force. So they've got to say, well, okay, that didn't happen. But he had a reasonable belief that it was happening. And a reasonable belief is a belief, does not mean, means a belief that would be held by an ordinary and prudent person in the same circumstances as the actor. There's a reason why it says ordinary and prudent person, and it just doesn't say means a belief that would be held by anybody else, or a belief that would be held by an ordinary and prudent police officer. If the legislature wanted a different standard and wanted you to compare it to any other police officer that's ever existed, then that's what they would have written in the law, but they didn't. Ordinary, prudent person. And the same circumstances of the actor is what happened that night. It does not mean every other ordinary, prudent person who has the exact amount of training and experience in the exact same fashion as Daniel Sanchez. It just means an ordinary, prudent person. And there was an ordinary, prudent person there, and his name was Kevin Hall. And what did Kevin Hall tell you? Kevin Hall told you, Kevin Hall called the police, rightly so. And what did Kevin Hall tell you when he was asked, do you think that Rajan Moonesinghe was attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force on you or the police officers, or in the imminent commission of murder of you or the police officers? What did he say? He said, oh, me and the police, we were fine. An ordinary, prudent person, right there, the person who called the police, was very clear with you that he did not believe that he saw Rajan Moonesinghe attempt to commit murder on Officer Sanchez or him or any of the other officers. He didn't see Rajan Moonesinghe attempt to use unlawful deadly force on him or any of the other officers. So what's next then? You've got to go. We also had the instruction on apparent danger. A person has a right to defend himself from apparent danger to the same extent as had the danger been real, provided he acted upon a reasonable apprehension of danger as appeared to him from his standpoint at the time. What does this mean? This means that, for instance, if the 911 call had been entirely made up, he still has a right to make decisions based on that. This means that if the gunshots were like some audio reconstruction of gunshots and weren't real gunshots, he still has the right to proceed, as he would if they were real gunshots. But it doesn't grant him the right to proceed unreasonably. And the same person who saw Rajan Moonesinghe with a rifle, the same person who heard those same gunshots, is the same person, Kevin Hall, who told you that Rajan Moonesinghe wasn't attempting to use unlawful deadly force on him or the officers or in the imminent commission. Officer Woodward, at the time of the first shot, Rajan was not using or attempting to use unlawful deadly force. This is one of the training officers. Okay. At the point where Mr. Moonesinghe has turned around and is holding the rifle, is it your testimony that you believe that he was using or attempting to use unlawful deadly force on any of those people I mentioned? Answer: when I turned, he had the rifle in a ready position. Thank you for that, but it's just a yes or no question. You believe he was using or attempting to use unlawful deadly force or no? What was his answer? He was not using deadly force at that specific moment, but he was in a position where he could. That is not the law. The law is attempting to use or using, not could use. He said at the moment the shot, Rajan Moonesinghe was not in the imminent commission of murder. He's crystal clear about that. Is it your testimony you believe Mr. Moonesinghe was in the imminent commission of murder of any of those people in the street at the point where he turned and was facing the street holding the rifle? It did not appear so at that moment. No 932 defense. Even one of their trainers who came in does that. Again, Kevin Hall. Oh no, we were fine. This is the person who summoned the help of the police, rightfully so. So, if Rajan Moonesinghe wasn't attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force, and he wasn't in the imminent commission of murder, and there was no reasonable belief that what he was doing was either of those things, what do you have to go to? Well, you have to make it bigger than it is. That's what you have to do. This is what we heard from these training officers. We heard ambush, 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 and swatting, and active shooter, active shooter, active shooter. And it just falls apart when you start asking questions. It just falls apart. You remember the training officer, Jonathan Slayton, who basically said, we tell people to shoot in these situations, and I would have told him to engage the suspect. Pro tip, engage the suspect is what you say when you don't want to say, I would have told him to kill him. I would have told him to use deadly force. I would have told him to shoot him. You use the words, engage the suspect. Did you see how big Slayton's eyes got when I said, who would you rather be? You could argue it either way. Really? Really? You could argue it either way. It has to be, we had these questions about ambush. A person commits an ambush. There were all kinds of dark places. There were all kinds of bushes. There were trees. There were fence lines. And there was Rajan Moonesinghe standing underneath his floodlight with a rifle pointed at the ground. That's where he was. That's what he was doing. That's not an ambush. It's not SWAT. And he was not an active shooter. The discharge of 2 gunshots in a residential area, if you call that an active shooter, how do you distinguish a real active shooter from things that, and this is unfortunate, but in a city of 1 million people, happen on a very frequent basis? You can't intelligently distinguish the two. And their whole training is about determining when an active shooter situation has happened. But what they want to tell you is that an active shooter, essentially the rules in the law don't count. And the rules in the law always count. Okay? And for the record, Officer Sanchez didn't end the killing. Officer Sanchez did the killing. Officer Sanchez didn't end the dying. Officer Sanchez caused the dying. But they've got to make this case because what is there is just not enough to justify deadly force. Afterwards, you find out that none of what actually happened was what these officers had concluded in advance happened. Did you hear Officer Markert? I thought this could be for real. Thought I was about to be in a gunfight. Something that they are thinking before they get to the scene. And it was important that they consider all of the possibilities that they get to the scene, but that includes the possibility that it's not an ambush, not a swatting, and not an active shooter as well, as what was. You didn't see a single one of these witnesses say, you know, it's possible that it's a homeowner. Guys in a row, possible that it's somebody defending their own home. It's possible that it's somebody that's undergoing a serious mental health episode. No consideration given to anything other than a conclusion that is going to lead to shooting Rajan Moonesinghe. And we see that again later. When he shoots Rajan Moonesinghe, what do they say? They say, well, you've got to shoot him because he's still moving. Why is he moving? Because he's been shot 3 times. That's reasonable? So they've got to build it up to be these things: ambush, swatting, an active shooter. That doesn't work because it's just kind of dumb to think that the guy on the porch and the lightning is swatting or ambushing. So now we have Rajan Moonesinghe was not attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force or in the imminent commission of murder. Daniel Sanchez didn't have a reasonable belief that he was. There was no ambushing, no swatting, and no active shooter. So what do we have to do now? Well, okay, none of those things were happening, but his training and departmental policy says he can do this, so it must be reasonable. That's the next argument. That's the argument that they make with these training officers. We pretty firmly established that neither the training nor the departmental policy actually conforms to the law. So what they want you to do is they want you to say, well, okay, his training and the policy don't conform to the law, but they gave him a belief, and we're going to call that a reasonable belief. That's the opposite of the law. But we'll set that aside for a moment, because I want you to focus on what that argument is. Okay? What is your training? Your training is what you are told to do. What is policy? Did you hear my question of, it might be the only yes or no question that their expert guy from yesterday morning, what was his name? Mark Saul. I've tried to forget that name as quick as I can. What was pretty much the only thing he said yes or no for either side? I just kind of said to him, hey, by the way, that policy, that's called the general orders, right? Yes. And that is my point. The notion of his training and departmental policy say he can do it, that argument is he was just following orders. They don't say it that way though. Just like they say engage the suspect instead of shoot him, they're going to say follow training and policy, because they're not going to say he was just following orders. Because if anybody came up here and mounted the defense of it was legal because he was following orders, they would be laughed out of court. We all know, just as a basic principle, that you can't get up and say that it's okay to break the law because you were following orders. We all know it. Just instinctively. It's like, apple pie and ice cream, right? It's part of America. This is America. You don't get to walk into court and say somebody else told me to do it and I did it, so it doesn't matter that it was illegal and I walked. We are all responsible for our own conduct. We all must be reasonable and prudent in our conduct, regardless of what we are instructed to do, especially when our conduct is the authority to take other people's lives on behalf of the state. They just said, I was just following orders, they'd be laughed out of court. So it's going to be training and departmental policy. But every time you hear training and policy, I want you to understand, and I want you to remember, and I want you to hear, he was just following orders. We wouldn't take that from anybody. Imagine if the Eagle Scouts of America said, you know what? We are going to supplement the safety of our community. We are going to train young people to carry a rifle and walk around and make sure that people are not being dangerous or violating the law. But we're not going to teach them what actually is the law. It's just going to be a little bit short of the law. And we're going to train them that you should do things that are short of the law, but it's okay. And then when one of their Eagle Scouts shoots somebody, you have the trainers and the policy people come in and say, this is what we told them to do. It would be laughed out of court. Laughed out of court. And it could be the Eagle Scouts, it could be a homeowners association, it could be NRA, it could be anybody. That would not fly. But that's exactly what they tried to do. So when they say that, training and policy, I want you to hear, he was just following orders. It does not make what he was doing reasonable, which is the standard implied under the law. For you, for me, for him, for everybody in this community. They train less than the law, and they teach less than the law, and they try to shoehorn that into a reasonable belief. They are making their own law. That's what they're doing. Have policies that you can kill people short of when the law says you can. Train people to kill under circumstances that are short of when the law says you can kill people. Show up and say, don't blame him. We filled him full of stuff that's not the law, and he acted on that. And they want you to label that a reasonable belief. And it's ridiculous. It fails on its face. And here you can see it in their general orders. Deadly force is permitted when an officer reasonably believes it is immediately necessary to protect himself or others from death or serious bodily injury. The word unlawful deadly force is not in there. The word imminent commission of murder is not in there. They've just decided that they're going to have a standard that doesn't account for situations when people are acting lawfully and you're not allowed to kill them, or for when people are falling short of attempting to commit or committing. They just say, protect others from death or serious bodily injury. That's not the law. The law is that you protect somebody when that other person is attempting to use or using deadly force, unlawful deadly force, or in the imminent commission of murder. It has to cover all of it, but they don't. That's why they told you that the thing he did wrong was order him to drop the gun. You remember that? I think it was Woodward testified, you know, you can give orders, but he shouldn't have given that order in this situation. That's what we get out of this. That is what we get out of this. That the problem was not that he shot Rajan Moonesinghe 5 times when Rajan Moonesinghe was not attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force or in the imminent commission of murder. The problem was Officer Sanchez told him to drop the gun. That's a hell of a lesson to take away from this. That is insane. Travis Joyner was brought in here. He didn't know the law as applied to Officer Sanchez. Jonathan Slayton doesn't care what the law is. Everything was fine. Wants you to think he couldn't pick between which position these two people were occupying, which was the superior position, the one you'd rather have. Couldn't even figure that one out. I think that says a lot. And then Jeff Woodward admitted that Officer Sanchez broke the law. We also had Mr. Borden. You remember Mr. Borden? There's something I forgot to point out to y'all about Mr. Borden. I thought it was amazing. Even shoes were blue. Did you see that? Blue leather shoes. As a, like, I'm going to use a Dexter Guilford sentence here. As a sartorial display of your inherent biases, accept no substitute for Mr. Borden. And even he told you, one, that he wasn't going to give you an opinion about whether Officer Sanchez was lawfully using deadly force. Two, he told you that with respect to all of the timing, that Officer Sanchez In that 1.2 seconds when the rifle is dropped, Officer Sanchez is making another decision to fire and has between 3 and 4 times, I think he said at least 3 times the amount of time needed to decide not to fire because he's dropped the rifle. And I think he said something about basically that Officer Sanchez was reacquiring the target or he was adjusting his fire or something like that. And that's exactly what happened. He shot him 3 times. He's moving because he's being shot. And so Officer Sanchez pauses to reacquire him in his sights and shoot him again, notwithstanding the fact that he has dropped the rifle. And their explanation for that is shoot people until they fall down. That's what Jeff Woodward told them, essentially. Shoot people until they fall down. Is that anywhere in the law? No. Under the law, when can you start shooting? When someone has attempted to use or used unlawful deadly force or is in the imminent commission of murder and you have a reasonable belief. That's when you can start. When do you stop? When you no longer have a reasonable belief that they are attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force or in the imminent commission of murder. And I'm pretty sure that I just shot him 3 times and he dropped that rifle that he wasn't pointing at me or the other people in the first place is absolutely beyond, not just a reasonable doubt, beyond all doubt. You don't have a belief that he's attempting to commit or in the imminent commission of murder or using unlawful deadly force. And plenty of time to make the decision. Officer Sanchez shot him again. And with plenty of time to make the decision again, Officer Sanchez shot him again. In clear, beyond all reasonable doubt, beyond any doubt, violation of Texas law. Here's Jeff Woodward. We teach them they should continue engaging until the threat is neutralized or no longer a threat. Here's that word again, right? Just like they're not going to tell you he's following orders, they're not going to tell you we teach to shoot them. It's engage. We tell them they should fire until the threat is no longer on their feet and they have fallen to the ground. If they are still standing, they are considered a threat if they are mobile. So fire until the subject is down. I think my 14-year-old daughter would look at me if I tried to tell her that was the law, and the only thing she'd have to say to me is, "Right." Where is that in 93.2 of the Penal Code? Where? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? This is the single highest responsibility that a person in our society can be vested in. The decision to take life. And they're telling him, just shoot him until he falls down? He's just following orders, folks. Just following orders. So go ahead and let him go. And the testimony about movement, he was still moving. He could grab the rifle. He's moving because he has been shot 3 times. His movements are to drop the rifle. He takes his hands and actually puts them both up in the air. He dropped the gun. The thing he told him to do. 2 more shots. Y'all, that's a crime. That is a crime. Shot 4. Rifle's down. He's turning away from him because he's being shot. And shot 5. You saw the horrible state that his left hand was in those autopsy photos. You can see it in shot 5. Jamie Gordon drops the rifle at the point of the second shot is fired, drops the rifle. And I said in between shots 3 and 4 is 1.2 seconds. I would call that in excess of 3 times the amount of time that you write is required for response, correct? Are we talking about the last 2 shots? Yes. And the answer is yes, as he is assessing correct. So that's Jamie Borden telling you that Officer Sanchez was fully capable of thinking and taking in what is going on and seeing him drop that rifle. And we heard a bunch of testimony about blah, blah, sights and yada, yada, and what did he see? Folks, every one of those rounds he fired struck Rajan Moonesinghe. One of them struck the rifle. Officer Sanchez said, drop the gun. If Officer Sanchez doesn't see the gun, he needs to stop firing. Officer Sanchez could perfectly well see that he had dropped the gun and kept firing. Just think about how backwards it is to say, we won't hold you responsible because your organization doesn't train you or make you follow the law, and that's the organization that makes everybody else follow the law. Because this is what's coming next. Okay, Rajan Moonesinghe wasn't attempting to commit or committing serious bodily injury, unlawful serious bodily injury. Was not attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force on Officer Sanchez or any of those people. Okay, Rajan Moonesinghe was not attempting to commit or committing or in the imminent commission of murder. Fine. Okay, yeah, he did not have a reasonable belief, especially on shots 4 and 5. Not even on shots 1 through 3. Okay. And okay, the training and the general orders, yeah, that's not up to par, and you can't use the excuse of I was following orders. Okay, but you know what? You know what, folks? If the training is so bad and the orders are so bad, how can we hold him responsible for that? You should write a letter to your city councilman or the mayor and tell them to train better and to do better and to have better policy. But don't hold him responsible for it. Not him. That's the last and final argument. 2 things about that argument. You pass this rail right here. Right here. You pass this rail. You are equal under the law. Right here. You, me, Daniel Sanchez, Mr. Guilford, everybody in the audience, everybody out there. You pass that rail. You are subject to the law. You don't get to say I was following orders. It's your decision, and it has to be reasonable, especially when you were talking about the taking of human life. That's point 1. And point 2 is this is how it all keeps going. They told you their policies approve of this. They told you they teach this. They told you they agree with it. They told you they're going to keep going. And if you don't actually apply the law, they'll say they're doing that with your permission. Okay? What did you hear from the first moment this happened?
Once you get up here, you go back to your car, okay? Good work with that. Good work.
That's from a guy who didn't actually see any of what happened, whose mind did not properly observe how many shots were fired. Within seconds, having just essentially standing over the body of Rajan Moonesinghe, standing over his body, says, you did good work. Okay? That's understandable. It actually is. He's a human being, right? He works with Officer Sanchez, sympathetic to Officer Sanchez. He likes Officer Sanchez. It's understandable, but it's not your role. Interim Chief Robin Henderson, okay? So from the guy next to him to the lady at the very top, we support Officer Sanchez. After a group of people just like you said, we think there's probable cause to believe this was criminal. What was her position? We support Officer Sanchez. What did Jeff Woodward tell you? Or I'm sorry, it wasn't Woodward. It was Woodward who said, we're going to keep teaching officers to do this. That was the end of Woodward's testimony, I believe. Officer Slayton said, who teaches the patrol rifle course, not just weapons, but the actual weapon that was used in this case. And Officer Slayton told you, I would have told him to engage the suspect. Right? So this is going to, if the response to, hey, don't hold him responsible because the department's policies aren't good enough and their training isn't good enough, their response is to keep going. And Jeff Woodward told you at the end, when I asked him, hey, is this a model for how you do it or how you don't do it? He told y'all this is a model for how you do it. There's only one group of people in the state of Texas who are vested with the power to enforce the law and to communicate clearly that this is a violation of the law. This is not how you do it. This is not reasonable. And that is you. That is it. There isn't any other group of people here. You ever, when I started, I've been doing this long enough to start this part by saying, you ever open up the newspaper? You ever fire up your personalized computer device and look on the news and see some incredibly egregious decision that has been made just to clear injustice? Save yourself. How could they do that? How could they let this injustice go? Today, you are the they. Nobody else. It's up to you. Oddly, Jeff Woodward kind of agrees in a weird way. He tells you that he's going to keep instructing people that that Officer Sanchez, what he did, that this is how they will continue to teach it. But what else did he tell you? He'd say, if we're maybe unsure of what we are seeing, an example of that would maybe be responding to a burglar alarm and encounter a subject inside with a gun down to their side. I advise officers, like this could be the homeowner, business owner, we don't know. So in that situation, I would absolutely give commands and try to make sure they are going to be compliant. If they aren't immediately compliant, at that point, it is clearly a deadly force situation. Jeff Woodward also told you in the same testimony what the right thing to do is. That is the right thing. We know it's the right thing because it's what Officer Sanchez started to do before he made the decision to shoot Rajan Moonesinghe 5 times. That is the prudent thing to do. That is what an ordinary prudent person would do. That is what Kevin Hall called them to do. It's not what was done. Instead, the man standing clearly backlit, rifle pointed at the ground. Officer Sanchez fires 3 rounds into him when Rajan Moonesinghe wasn't attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force or in the imminent commission of murder. Then Officer Sanchez paused, reacquired his target. Now he has no gun at all. He shoots him again. Pauses, shoots him again. Controlled shots, Officer Brio called that. And those shots, all 5 of them, were a violation of Texas law. They are deadly combat. On the other side of this rail are the friends and family of Rajan Moonesinghe. On behalf of the state of Texas, on behalf of the friends and family of Rajan Moonesinghe, we ask you to do one thing. Apply the law. Apply the ordinary prudent person standard. Apply it to each shot. And you will see, beyond any reasonable doubt, that there was no reasonable belief that Rajan Moonesinghe was attempting to use or using unlawful deadly force or in the imminent commission of murder of Daniel Sanchez, of Stephen Marker, of Bruce it's Brito or Kevin Hall. And that makes those shots, while 4 and 5 are particularly egregious, that makes all 5 of those shots, each one individually, a violation of the law of deadly conduct, and makes Officer Sanchez guilty. On behalf of this family, of the state of Texas, we ask you to follow that law and find him guilty.
First, I want to thank you for your patience with me these last couple of weeks. I know how annoying my cough and voice have been, so I can imagine how annoying it has been to everybody else. So thank you, and I hope that you don't hold it against Officer Sanchez. Officer Sanchez wants to thank you. You've been paying attention, how attentive you've been to show how serious that you're taking this case. How you've seen the notes, watching the witnesses. That's all he can ask of you. Now, everybody deals with stress differently. Apparently, I get sick with stress. The family of Mr. Moonesinghe has been stressed. Officer Sanchez's family has been stressed. I'll tell you, both tables have been stressed. And I know you've been stressed. Can't imagine that 2 weeks ago, you came in here doing your civic duty, thinking that you were going to have to see the videos and the pictures that you've seen. Now, the state, you just heard closing. A very good portion of that closing was about policy and training, right? An indictment on APD's training. Not so much Officer Sanchez. But we'll get to that later. Mr. Drummond up here making assumptions about what words mean that officers said. What people saw, just like Mr. Joyner, their expert, making assumptions. I want to take you back to, oh, these TVs are not on, Judge.
Can we get the, come on.
Were these on you? Okay, all right, that's fine. I want to take you back to November 14th, 2022. Defense exhibits 1 through 10, ring cameras throughout the day. What did we learn about that day? We learned that Mr. Moonesinghe was in California. We learned that he came home. We learned that he and his girlfriend broke up. She was living next door in the duplex. We saw on the camera him walk out to the street. If you see in the video and you look at the reflection in his door, he goes out to the street. He talks to somebody. Comes back. What does he do? He turns the camera towards the other side of the duplex. All day, you can see the changes in his mannerism. You can see what's going on with him. So what does he do? He gets high on cocaine and gets obliterated with alcohol. Then the paranoia kicks in, thinking somebody's in there, and he runs around the neighborhood like he's in a Call of Duty game. He calls his friend to come. You see the friend carrying the gun case. You've heard that the friend cleared the house, that there was nobody there. He talked to Miss Bean. He talked to Kevin Hall. And we will get to what those conversations were like in a little bit. But this is what was going on with that man that night. And a short while after his friend cleared his house, as the officers are arriving on scene, he's shooting through the front door of his house. And then, As they're getting out of the car, now Kevin Hall, you heard him testify that he turned back and looked when the officers were arriving. And what did he do? He shot through the door again. The state wants you to believe that that's not active shooter situation. The state would like for you to completely just disregard that he's a police officer, that he has to make split-second decisions. His split-second decisions means it could be a matter of life and death to him, to other people, and even to Mr. Moonesinghe. Mr. Moonesinghe created this situation, not Officer Sanchez. Was this just a scary situation? Or was this actually a dangerous situation? Because we've heard testimony that Mr. Hall and Miss Bean didn't think it was dangerous. Mr. Hall, he had a conversation with Mr. Moonesinghe. Mr. Moonesinghe told him, hey, did you see anybody? Right? He's thinking somebody's breaking into his house. Mr. Hall didn't see anybody. But then, as you saw in the ring camera videos in the Defense Exhibits 1 through 10, Mr. Moonesinghe had run out of his house carrying the weapon, going out to the street. Mr. Hall sees him point that weapon down the street, so he calls 911, which is relayed to the officers. Miss Bean comes out, her dog's barking, wakes her up. And as you've heard, this is a heavily populated neighborhood. Houses on top of each other. People are sleeping. Miss Bean comes out to talk to him. Mr. Moonesinghe informs her, I think people are in my house. What does Miss Bean tell him to do? What he should do is call 911. If you wanted help, call 911. And what was his response? I have a big fucking gun. And as you saw, at this point, his behavior's changed. Miss Bean, she even says, I didn't recognize him. That was not the Raj that I knew. Miss Bean goes home and tells her husband, Raj has a big gun. And what does he do? He tells her to get on the ground. That shows you fear. The fear that that man had that gun. The attached duplex, we've heard testimony. The neighbor was home. And the attached duplex. And nobody was in his house. I'm going to go through, I'm not going to talk about everybody that said anything. I'm not going to sit here for an hour and talk to you. One, because I probably can't. Right? With my voice, you won't hear me. But two, there's nothing that I'm going to say to you that's different than what you've already heard. I'm not going to show you anything that you haven't already seen. You've seen it all. The witnesses, the evidence, all of that. But let me point out a few things. The state expert, you saw he testified twice. What did he do to conduct his investigation? Right? He went to the scene. He looked at some reports and some ring videos, right? What did he not do? He didn't watch the body-worn cameras. He didn't watch Daniel Sanchez's body-worn camera. He didn't even look to see what kind of optic Officer Sanchez was using to maybe try to get an understanding of what Officer Sanchez actually saw. Why? Because that doesn't fit the narrative that you're being told. What's his experience? Now, the state and Mr. Joyner, they want you to give him a lot of credit because he was in the FBI. Made it clear, right? But yesterday, we got to hear his real experience, right? His real Texas law enforcement experience as a patrol officer, like Officer Sanchez, but not. Because what you heard is he's a reserve officer that he trains a 20-man department. And that he spent 2 years on patrol. Less experienced than Officer Sanchez. 2 years on patrol. 1 day a week. With somebody else in the car with him. That's like a field training officer. That's like a ride-along. You can go to the police department, sign on a form, and go ride with a officer for a shift. They want you to believe what he said. But one thing he did say is it was possible Officer Sanchez didn't see Mr. Moonesinghe drop the rifle. And why is that important? Why is that important? Obviously, he saw the rifle at first, right? Now, the state wants you to believe that if you don't see the rifle anymore, then you stop shooting, right? We'll get to that. Jamie Borden. Mr. Drummond made a point to make fun of Mr. Borden's shoes for being blue. So that you think that he has some kind of bias towards police officers or for police officers. I wear a blue band. Why? To support law enforcement, just like Jamie Borden told you. Not to support individual cops. Cops make mistakes, he said. No, it's to support law enforcement because there are good men and women out there that have to see the worst in our society so that you don't have to. We need to support our law enforcement. Training officers since 2010. His experience in testifying. Here's the game. Okay, here's the game in use of force. I'm going to unveil the curtain for use of force experts. The state defense attorneys, we seek out use of force experts. We ask for their opinions. We give them the evidence. They give us our opinions. If it's not an opinion that benefits our case, we don't call them to testify. So whether they testified for or against, 96% of the time for cops, that doesn't.
Pardon me, I'm gonna have to object here. That is a misstatement of the law. If we hire an expert, and we get an opinion that says that the officer's use of force was reasonable, we turn that over. We have to turn that over.
I didn't say it wasn't turned over, Judge. I said that they will testify.
Yeah, I think that's, he didn't say, he said it wasn't use of force.
Absolutely. They turned it over and tell us. He's a consultant on use of force with the Texas Rangers and DPS right here in Texas. They call him from Nevada to come here. Over 20 years as a peace officer. 20 years up the ranks. He is the only person that you heard testify about Mr. Moonesinghe and that third shot coming from his rifle. Not their experts on their digital recreations, nobody. His video analysis showed there was a shell casing found right there, right? You've heard the testimony. The audio showed a third shot. He's not biased towards cops. He wants to make sure that law enforcement protects themselves from bad cops. No one wants a bad cop gone worse than a good cop. That's not a lie. That is a true statement. That is echoed throughout this entire country in police departments. State video experts. $20,000 of taxpayer money went to this recreation. You heard that the original submission had some edits that needed to be made, and then they submitted the final edits. You also heard that they can't tell you what Officer Sanchez's perspective was. All they could tell you were all their measurements, all their cameras, all their computer stuff is where they were in the timing of the shots. But one important detail that they didn't get right for their entire analysis, they measured Rajan Moonesinghe at 5'9" His California driver's license says he's 6'3". That is a big difference, especially when you're measuring in the most minute detail. When you're trying to figure out perspective of what the officer sees, what he sees, the entire totality of the incident. $20,000. Training Academy instructors. Mr. Drummond is up here making assumptions about what some of their words mean, right? You heard what they had to say. You heard Travis Joyner. You heard that Mr. Joyner, Chuck Joyner, their expert, created this dynamic resistance response model. He told you that TCOL, the licensing agency for Texas, requires all agencies in Texas to use it. Travis Joyner said they don't use it, right? And it's approved by TCOL. So we talk about who's right, who do we listen to? Jonathan Slater, Jeff Woodward. The state wants you to disregard that Officer Sanchez is a police officer. His training doesn't matter when it comes to his belief. But it all comes into effect. If the indictment is on the police department, it's incumbent upon them to have these discussions with the police department, to change their training, if their training is bad. But as you've heard, they go above and beyond what is required by TCOL in their training. These instructors, with almost 60 years of combined experience in police work, training officers, they told you he did exactly what we would expect one of our officers to do, given the entire situation. Not these little frame-by-frame pictures, because Officer Sanchez didn't have the luxury of pausing for each frame. In less than 6 seconds, he's hearing shots, he's multiple shots, a guy coming at, carrying a weapon like this. Anybody that plays Call of Duty knows you see him carrying this. Also, if you look in the ring video where he's firing into the door, right before he raises that weapon, he's carrying it the same way. same way. The officers testified that when he turned, that it was aggressive. It was an aggressive manner, the way he walked out. Kevin Hall, remember him? He looked and saw the officer. He didn't call 911. He didn't drop the rifle when he saw the officer. He chose to walk out towards them, close the gap, as the use of force experts testified to. Chief Robin Henderson. Chief Robin Henderson is a well-respected chief. You could tell by Mr. Guilford's questioning how much the state respects her. When Officer Sanchez was indicted, and this came out in Mr. Guilford's questioning, not mine. She came out and publicly supported him. In a rare move, as she told you. It's not often you see that. And she even went further to say Mr. Moonesinghe was a danger to the neighbors in the community. Why would she do that? Why would she put herself out there like that, publicly, in a rare move? Why? Because it's true. Mark Stotler, 29 years, SWAT, all over, ate up with SWAT. You saw Mr. Drummond and Mr. Sala going back and forth, right? And Mr. Sala kept telling you, look, some of those are not yes or no answers. Now, you want me to say yes or no, but you don't want me to give the context of the answer. You heard totality of the circumstances over and over and over. You heard it maybe once or twice from Chuck Joyner. But that's the standard, right? You don't look at it in a vacuum. You don't look at the case in a vacuum. You don't look at each shot in the vacuum. What did he do? He made 4 site visits out there. He went up on a porch to look at Mr. Moonesinghe's vantage point. Chuck Joyner didn't do that. He went day and night. He actually measured the distance. And he got perspective from Officer Sanchez. And one thing nobody else did, he gave an analysis on the optic. He's familiar with the optic. It was in the police report. It shows exactly what optic is on this rifle and this rifle. As a SWAT member, he told you he's familiar with it. And what Officer Sanchez could have seen, you couldn't tell if the reticle was blocking the light, how the light affects what you see. And why is that important? Because why that is important, unlike what Mr. Drummond said, if you see the officer drop the weapon, you stop shooting, right? Wrong. He's still a deadly threat. Why? And that is, it's a term used in all of law enforcement, right? Why? Because it takes half a second to raise up. Half a second. And all those trainers told you, you don't have to wait until a rifle is pointed at you. You don't have to wait until a shot is fired. Why? Because it is important to save other people's lives. It's important to save yourself. Unfortunately, another man lost his life, which is tragic. Absolutely. This Officer Sanchez had to respond to that threat. He had to respond to that man, highly intoxicated, exactly doing what he did. If you want to get somewhat of a perspective of what Officer Sanchez saw and how lighting affects, just look at his body cam. Mr. Joyner didn't look at it. But you can go back there and look at it. It's crazy, right? You have to really pay attention. But the light can affect you. What you see based on movement. You heard Mr. Solid and other people talk about how Mr. Moonesinghe moved because he was being shot. Did Officer Sanchez know that he was being shot? Did Officer Sanchez know that he hit him at any point? What he didn't do, he didn't come in here with some pie in the sky, assumption-based opinion. He gave you an opinion based on generally accepted police practices, a methodology that is used all over the country. You gotta love technology when it works, and you gotta love it when it doesn't. There, Officer Daniel Sanchez. What did he know? Apparently, Mr. Joyner didn't listen to the actual radio transmission from the dispatcher to the officer. What he did know, though, when he assigned to the call, was that Mr. Moonesinghe, a man, right, was pointing a weapon in the street. You heard Officer Marker talk about what kind of priority call that was, how fast they needed to get there. And then you hear Mr. Joyner in different testimony that he would have known what was on the MDC, the computer terminal. Well, Mr. Sala explained it to you, how that actually works. And listening to the radio transmission, it wasn't put out that he was shooting into his own home. Why? As you saw, the officers were pulling up as he was shooting. No way they're gonna hear that transmission. No way that transmission is gonna come in before it actually happened, right? Or that he was turning his lights on and off in his house to imply that the officers would know that it's his house. Wasn't put out on the radio. It was on the computer. As you heard from these officers, when you're in a call situation like that, especially when you're pulling up and there's gunshots and you're trying to assess the entire situation, where did it come from? Who's here? We don't know exactly what address that we're being told to go to. The last thing they're gonna do is look at their computer. They're gonna get out because they're trained in those situations is to go out, find the threat, find the danger. That's what cops are trained to do. The average citizen, they don't get put in these kinds of situations. This is a special case because it is an officer. I'm not saying the law doesn't apply at all, but you have to take that into consideration. What he didn't know if Mr. Moonesinghe was a home invader. He didn't know they take family violence calls. He didn't know if he was trying to kill his family or someone else. Scorned lover. He didn't know any of that. But what did he observe? He observed audibly gunshots. Men walking towards him with the gun, like this. You've heard so many different terms about low ready, high ready. The fact remains, he was carrying it an aggressive way, where you saw when he shot through the front door was how he was carrying it, half a second it takes to shoot. Officer Sanchez doesn't have to wait that half a second. Why? Because if you wait, you die. Now, you heard the trainers talk about why they drill so much, why they train so much. Because they train so much on these situations. When you get put in a life or death situation like that, you don't have time, your brain doesn't have time to process in split seconds to make those decisions. Why your training is important. Your training is important. What do you say, muscle memory? Oh, your brain, I recognize this. And why is all that important? We'll talk about that in a minute. Now, you saw this during jury selection, right? We got probable cause. We're here today because, as Mr. Drummond told you, juries such as yourself determined that there was probable cause. Not like on TV where you get to see witnesses testify and cross-examine and all that. The state's burden is beyond a reasonable doubt. You see how high that is. But think about clear and convincing. A firm belief that the allegations are true. Now, you have your jury charge. And you go back there and you think about, okay, where does reasonable doubt come from, right? And some of you answered during Renard. From the evidence itself, from the lack of evidence, burdens on the state, right? From the unanswered questions that you have, that can cause reasonable doubt. Inconsistencies in the evidence. I'll tell you, very rarely do you have experts for the state agree with experts from the defense and vice versa. Right? It's the credibility of the witness that you determine which one to believe. And the weight that you give that evidence of what those experts are up here saying. And whether or not it's just not proven to you. They have to prove, as Mr. Drummond said, that Officer Sanchez discharged a weapon at a person. Right? But they also have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the defenses don't apply, that you're gonna have, that you have right there that was ready. Now, lawyers like to complicate things. We have a bad reputation for that. And that's warranted, can't say. And by complicate things, we show you little things here, we show you little things there. We move things around. We ask the witnesses questions that we want them to say, right? Or what we hope they'll say. But the fact of the matter is, this case isn't as complicated as you think. Self-defense. You must determine whether the state's proved beyond a reasonable doubt one of the following. Beyond a reasonable doubt. More than a firm belief. The defendant did not believe his conduct was immediately necessary to protect himself against Rajan Moonesinghe's use or to use of unlawful deadly force, or to prevent Rajan Moonesinghe's imminent commission of murder. You've heard little pieces of that for 2 weeks now. Imminent commission, prevent imminent commission of murder. Doesn't mean stop murder that has happened. His job is to prevent it from about to happen. Half a second is imminent. Or that the defendant's belief was not reasonable. You have to prove, they have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt, not just a firm belief. One, that he didn't believe his conduct was immediately necessary. Or two, that his belief was not reasonable. That's for self-defense. defense, that's for himself. And the same thing is for defense of the third person. Anybody else out there? Margaret told you, he thought he were being ambushed. Miss Bean, you saw how close her house was. You saw that you heard that there was a neighbor in the complex, the duplex. You can't just have a firm belief that the state approved this. It has to be higher than a firm belief. Now, apparent danger. Let's talk about that. A person, and you think about it in the context of all of this, right? Talking about reasonable belief. A person has a right to defend himself from apparent danger to the same extent as he would had the danger been real. Provided he acted upon a reasonable apprehension of danger as it appeared to him from his standpoint at the time. He wasn't standing there frame by frame. In a matter of seconds, the man shot twice, walked towards him with a gun, with an AR-15. That's a reasonable apprehension of danger from his standpoint. Not the state's. It's not the state's belief, it's not their standpoint. It's his. All right, I'm wrapping up. Ladies and gentlemen, if you or your family member was Mr. Moonesinghe's neighbor, what would you want the officers to do? Would you want them to go out there, take no action, and be murdered? Because you've heard from the officers that was potentially what could have happened in half a second. What if Officer Sanchez wasn't there? You saw already Mr. Moonesinghe's mental state. You saw how intoxicated he was. You saw that he was shooting a weapon. There was nobody in his house. Just imagine what would have happened if Officer Sanchez wouldn't have been there. That state's gonna come over here. What would happen? He'd still be alive, right? You know, that's not necessarily the case. The man is willing to shoot when officers are pulling up. He's capable of doing anything. Now, it's clear. It's clear. The facts of this case, the reasonable apprehension, the prevention of imminent murder, not stopping the act of committing murder. So, ladies and gentlemen, as Mr. Drummond pointed out, and myself during jury selection, 20 years ago I sat at that table. Today, the state wants you to label that man right there a criminal. And we're asking you to look at the facts and follow the law and find that man not guilty. Thank you.
Please, the court. Tomorrow, I would have dealt with shooting death of Rajan Moonesinghe for 3 years, much like his family. What you all don't know is that by arrangement, with some folks who work at the Austin Police Department and the SIU, who I happen to appreciate, will call us with one of the first notifications after they notify their chain of command. They call us, and they tell us there's been an officer-involved shooting. I would have learned this prior to this family. Even at the time, the only information that's available to me is very limited. SIU makes it available to me as soon as they can. But initially, I get to see what the public does. The rain camera footage, body worn camera footage. And it was then, it remains now, an unlawful shooting. For 3 years, in preparation for this case, sitting through this trial for the last 2 weeks, I thought for sure, perhaps me and my colleagues had missed something. Perhaps there was some slide that neither of our experts had been able to identify for us. Something, slight movement on the part of Rajan. That this man, his lawyers could point to and say, see folks, he's perceiving things in time that you and I cannot appreciate. I didn't hear anything about it. Nobody pointed out a slide where he moved. What we saw was exactly what was depicted. The man who walked out onto this porch and stopped at the edge of the vestibule, or would be a vestibule if there was another wall to it, who stepped out, and as soon as he cleared a pillar, was met with the first of what would be 5 shots that killed him. And nothing's changed. You all have heard a lot over the course of the last 2 weeks. You all are probably more prepared to be conversant about law enforcement tactics than the average person walking up and down the street. And you know the law. And I don't think any of you have any disagreement with me that at the time that this man decided to shoot, from his first shot through his fifth, that not only was Rajan not using deadly force, unlawful deadly force, or attempting to use unlawful deadly force, he was not in the imminent commission of murder, and no one could form a reasonable belief to the contrary. I have a PowerPoint prepared. I may use a couple of slides. I decided this morning that I was prepared to talk to you. I would prefer to talk to you all maybe with some notes. Why? I've been doing this a long time. I've probably tried more of these cases than anybody in this state. I've learned a lot. I know some of what you all are going to have to deal with a few steps away from here shortly. And I'm hoping that I can connect with you in a way that prepares you for some of the things that I anticipate you all will have to do. Why? Because too often in these cases, the law and the evidence isn't what means that there's a verdict for guilty. Like the rest of this courthouse, that's typically not enough and something's wrong with that. Let me start off by saying to you, this city, this county in which we all live in, has a life. And it can be told in pictures, books, and so on. What happened to Rajan is part of this city's life. We know what happened. The part that we don't know yet, the part that has not yet been written, is what the folks who were responsible for giving the official stamp as to whether this was lawful or not and still hadn't been written. I'll give you an example. I-35 at one time was as close to a Parisian boulevard that we find in Texas. On either side of the thoroughfare, traveling south and north, we're lined with trees. In the middle, there were promenades, many parks. And it also happened to be the borderline of what was called the Negro sector, where nobody could move if you were black folk past that. In the life of this city, people like you and me did something about it. In 1991, 4 girls were killed out at a yoga shop out here off Shoal Creek. Folks were in a position to look at that case and do something about it, deciding its best practices. Don't put the public access to the restroom behind the counter where these kids are working in 1997, biologists and ecologists discovered a little fully aquatic amphibian salamander that lived amongst the rocks and crevices. One of our favorite recreational spots in Barton Springs. In 1997, we did something about that. That's the life of the city. And in this case, this is part of the life of the city. And you all are called upon to make a decision as to what you saw under the law that you all know was justified, was lawful. To make no mistake about it, you all make law no less than the legislature over there. It's the law that's going to govern here. People that make important decisions will be looking at your decision. I'll be looking at the decision for these cases. The police department, the community, we're all going to be looking at this decision. So I want to talk to you all a little bit about some of the things that I anticipate that you're going to have to think about. Start off with an anecdote. The old time folks in my life used to tell me all the time, truth is not an offense. Maybe when I was 10 years old, I heard the rest of it in Sunday school one morning. Miss Ellison told me, yeah, the truth is not an offense. Unbend your back and bear witness to it. That sustained me through a lot of my life. Why is that? Why am I sharing that anecdote with you? Because the truth of what happened, you've seen it, you all know it. I'm sure there were times when we were asking questions and showing you things, and you were saying to yourself, yeah, I got it last week. You all know what happened here. Oftentimes in these courtrooms, there is a disconnect between the truth of what happened and verdicts that juries render. The law assumes that there's going to be that disconnect. Why none of us were there? That's why not guilty is not the same as innocent. But you all have a luxury here, not afforded to all juries. That is that the truth of this case, the actual truth, would be reflected in the true verdict. I want to remind you of the oath that you took. Before we even talk about a charge, let's talk about the oath that you took. And understand that everybody in the world of this courtroom, everybody, there's only one person who I don't know, but everybody I know in the world of this courtroom is serving and operating under some oath. This is yours. A true verdict record. That's why I'm talking to you about the truth. True verdict according to the law and the evidence. How do you know in this case what is the truth and what the right verdict is, the correct verdict, the verdict that serves justice in this case? How do you know? You know based on the arguments that you are hearing. Look, I don't have to belabor the point. You all know that much of what you're being told is simply untrue and even ridiculous. I'm not even sure how I would be able to stand up in front of you all and tell you that based on what we know, that it's a reasonable statement of the facts that Rajan was advancing or preparing to launch an attack or ambushing anyone. Wouldn't he have to know that Officer Sanchez was at least out there? What fact has anybody seen that indicates that he was aware of anything, that he was doing nothing but what he had done previously, continuing to look for whoever he thought this intruder was? He walked to the edge of his porch, stopped, held his rifle like this, and as soon as his front of his body cleared that pillar, as he was looking in front of his house, he was shot. It is shameful to stand up in front of you all and tell you he was approaching or advancing towards Officer Sanchez only in the most general, misleading way. I can't help but think that that was intentional. We know where Officer Sanchez was. He was at his 10 o'clock. He was at his 45 degrees, nestled between a light pole and a fence, which tells you he did not think that Rajan had even sighted him, because that is not the position you take if you think that somebody just fired 2 shots and was preparing to ambush you. That's not the position you're going to take, and you're certainly not giving a command. That's just untrue. It's not the truth. And your verdict has to reflect that. There's nothing anybody can do about it. These are the facts. I didn't make them up. Brad didn't make them up. They are what they are. I'm trying to tell you all what's going on. This is a playbook. You want me to tell you how it goes? First, who's your victim? Marginalize your victim. That's the first thing. We need you to know how much, what the toxicology report said. You need to know that. Although there's no way that this man would have known any of that. Has nothing to do with his reasonable belief. So why are we talking about it? You all know why we're talking about it. That's the first part. And listen, I did death penalty work for 18 years in this courtroom, in this courthouse. I understand the value from a lawyer's perspective of having asymmetry and imbalances between the supposed moral imbalances between who's on trial and who got killed. I understand it. You're gonna convict this man or guy who's on cocaine and alcohol. That's what's being asked of you. I want you to understand it. And then you ask yourself, what part of the law is that? What part of justice is that? You didn't even know any of that. What else do? You mystify the work. I'm going to be the first one to tell you that policing is an honorable profession, and they're asked to do things that none of us have to do or would want to do. My biological father was a police officer, my next door neighbor, 2 doors down, retired from the San Antonio Police Department. I got a nephew who's in the academy up in Fort Worth. We don't respect policing. But don't you understand that a verdict that reflects the truth and evidence actually honors that profession? Why is that? Here's why. Officers do have to make split-second decisions in dangerous situations. Isn't that exactly why we revere the work they do? That's exactly why. It's not because they get to say, I have a monopoly on telling you what is imminent. What you noticed when you listen to my colleague, Mr. Howman, addressing you, what you noticed was they throw the word imminent out there as if it had some sort of import that once it's thrown out there, that's it. Imminent means the next thing that was going to happen. I'll be the first to concede to you all. There's a part of police work that I would agree is ineffable. I wouldn't be able to explain it. Kind of like listening to, Charlie Parker. I can study the notes, but there's some things that beyond my ability to grasp. But I can study the notes. I can transcribe the notes. Here, they're not even asking you to transcribe the notes. Just assume the next thing was going to happen, that Rajan Moonesinghe was going to stand at the porch and turn it. What evidence is there of that? There is none. Which takes us to the next part of the playbook. Number 3. People like you all can demand to have it explained to you. You're telling me it can't be explained to you. They're telling you there's a part of the law that you just got to trust that they alone are the arbiters of. And that's the end of all of this. Why is that? All of our generals, all of our armed forces, as I understand it, the most powerful nation on the face of the earth, and relatively has never been rivaled in history in terms of the asymmetries of the differences in power. Are answerable to a civilian. Our city, our county is a microcosm of that. They answer to the police department, police officers answer to civilians. In this case, they're answering to you all. I realize that some of this may be difficult, and that's a problem, but it's not your problem. That is, it's nothing that you all are responsible for having created. There's some things that folks that have been in my position, and I think in other parts of our government should have been doing some time ago. We probably wouldn't be here now, but we are. But we are. So I understand that there may be some discomfort with this, but I want to suggest to you, I'm not trying to tell you how to go about fulfilling your duties. I just want to bring some of these things to your attention so as you are fulfilling your duties, you can think about, okay, this may be difficult, but it's not hard. You want to know what hard is? Hard is if you're summoned to a jury in 1735 and somebody is accused of libel, criticizing the king, and everybody in the courtroom knows that what he said was true. The judge telling you can't consider the truth. Hard as being living up in Ohio somewhere, and there's a man that worked his way through the swamps and forests of Kentucky to make his way to freedom in Ohio. He's made himself a part of your community. He works every day, he's productive, and one day some people round him up and say, we're taking him back to Kentucky to force some fugitive slave act, and you're on that jury. And they tell you that's the law. That's hard. Why? Because you know in your heart something's wrong with that law. And you're being asked to enforce a law that is unjust. Not a one of you think that the law of deadly conduct is an unjust law. Or that the standard that our legislature has adopted that prioritizes life, that says that life can only be taken no matter who you are. There's not a special rule, as you all know, for police officers as opposed to civilians. It's the same rule. Has to be immediately necessary. Reasonable belief that it's immediately necessary. Right now, we don't talk about that part of the law, and you'll see it when you get your charge. Let me make sure. I don't want to misquote. Page 1. It's actually on page 2, the front of the page, label 0, so you all know. That went into the degree. There's a temporal aspect to it. When? Right now. How much? That's to the degree. That's what puts mockery to all this nonsense you've heard about. Well, you know, it's taking these shots. No, it's every shot. When and to the degree. That's the law. I've shared with you some of what I've learned bringing these cases to jurors like you all. I hope it sustains you all, that you find your way to the only verdict in this case, and that's a verdict of guilt. I learned on Wednesday that my nephew had received his sidearm. I haven't talked to him yet. But hopefully when I talk to him, I can tell him, young man, you need to understand something. If you're in a position where you ever believe that you have to shoot somebody, understand that the process works. And at the end of that process, you very well may be in front of a jury as it should be. Please return the only verdict that's a true verdict. It reflects the law and the evidence in this case. Thank you all.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know you have been working hard all morning, and now it's early afternoon. I did receive your note, and in response to your note, I will be reading you the following supplemental charge, and I believe you each have a copy of it as well. So, in the state of Texas versus Daniel Sanchez, supplemental charge. Members of the jury, you are instructed that in a large proportion of the cases, absolute certainty cannot be expected. Although the verdict must be the verdict of each individual juror and not a mere acquiescence in the conclusion of other jurors, yet each juror should show a proper regard to the opinion of each other. You should listen with a disposition to be convinced to the arguments of other jurors. If a larger number of jurors are for deciding the case one way, those in the minority should consider whether they are basing their opinion on speculation or surmise and not on the evidence in the case, keeping in mind the impression the evidence has made on a majority of the jurors of equal honesty and intellect as the minority. Bear in mind also that if you do not reach a verdict in this case, that a mistrial will be granted and the case will be tried again to a different jury, but that the next jury will be in no better position to decide the case than you. Therefore, you are instructed that it is your duty to decide the case if you can conscientiously do so, and you will now retire to continue your deliberations. So I am going to declare a mistrial based on the fact that the jurors have been deliberating for 14 hours stated that they did not think that further deliberations would result in a verdict. So I will be declaring mistrial at this point. I am going to bring the jury back out to excuse them. I know the lawyers probably want to talk to them, since we're going to have to do this again and want to find out why we're here. And I welcome that, and I'll let them know that they can either stay or not stay. But feel free as soon as I send them back, you are free to go back and talk to them. Sometimes I go back and talk to them since we're still, so I am declaring a mistrial and excusing you. I want you all to know though, this has no reflection on you as individual jurors. I know I appreciate, and the lawyers and the parties all appreciate how hard you've worked on this case. So I don't want you to feel like you failed us. You had different decisions on how this case should end up, and yeah, that's okay. All right, we'll try it again. But for right now, you are excused. The ban against talking to people is now lifted. You can talk to anybody or nobody at all. I do know for a fact that each side of lawyers would love a chance to chat with you if you stay in the jury room for a few minutes, because they will have to try this case again, and they want to know what they did right, what they did wrong, what would be more persuasive, what was helpful, what wasn't. So you don't have to stay. If you want to leave, feel free to leave. I think some of you probably have thoughts. So feel free to share them with the lawyers. All right? Thank you again for your service. Craig has some certificates for you. And have a good rest of your day. All right? You're excused.